That came later. So, people need to know that Mom died on September 7th, 1989. She was only 50 years old. And essentially the way she abused her body caught up with her, and she died. And that was September of 89.
Right.
So there was actually a supernatural event the day she died. And so you're familiar with transcendental meditation, the ability to leave your body and go essentially anywhere at will.
You mean astral travel?
Okay, so that's I thought they were the same thing, but astral travel then. So yeah, because I guess after you're dead, meditation wouldn't really be a possibility, would it?
Not really meditating.
Yeah. So astro travel. So the ability to leave your body. And now, of course, that's I think intended for when you're alive, not after you're dead. But here's the story. So this is 1989. There are no cell phones. There is no internet. We still have phones on the walls. You still have to pay to make a long distance call, all of that, remember?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So Mom had two sisters, one in Arizona, one in California. And then she also had her best friend, Mrs. Adams. Do you remember Mrs. Adams?
I remember Mrs. Adams very well.
Okay. So Mrs. Adams was, I always think of her kind of like an adopted grandmother, because our grandparents were dead by the time I was a little kid. I never really knew my grandparents. So Mr. and Ms. Adams were an elderly couple that lived across the street from one of the homes that we lived at one point. And then we maintained a friendship. Mom and Dad maintained a friendship with them.
Yeah.
Right. And
just a quick story about Mrs. Adams. She was a great eccentric, though. I was in the 8th grade. She lived across the street from the house that Mom and Dad were renting. It was sort of a ranch outside of outside of Turlock.
Yeah, it was Griffith Avenue Ranch.
They had a 2-story house that she and her elderly husband were owned. And Mrs. Adams asked me one day to come clean her upper story windows, the outside of them. And she didn't have a ladder. And I said, remember, I'm 8th grade, 9th grade. I said, well, Mrs. Adams, I can't, there's no way to reach those windows. And she said, oh, we'll just crawl outside.
Oh
and I said, well, how will I not fall to the ground? And she said, well, just hang on the roof with one hand and wash with the other.
Oh my gosh.
And she wasn't kidding. And I was with Mrs. Adams, I can't hang on. I'm not sure that would work. And so she let the idea die, but that was a serious proposal. She wanted me to be hanging on to the roof and washing with this other hand.
She was sweet. Her and her husband were very sweet
kind,
people. Yeah. And
one of Mom's only friends later in life. And
yes.
And Mom loved Mrs. Adams precisely because she could go over there drunk in her bathrobe, and Mrs. Adams would still let her in and they could hang out.
Yep. Yeah, well, that relationship was still very strong when Mom died. So Mom has just died, and I go to a payphone in the hospital to call her sisters and to call Mrs. Adams. So I'm going to make 3 phone calls. Now, remember, they don't even know Mom's in the hospital.
Right.
It all happened within 24 hours. I mean, Mom went in for an angiogram, was transferred to the hospital, died the next day. I mean, it was all very, very fast. So we haven't even told them that Mom is sick or that she's having surgery. So the very first information they're going to get that something is wrong is that she's dead. So there's no way they have any information. It's impossible. Well, I called Mrs. Adams first. I probably should have called her sisters first, but whatever. I called Mrs. Adams first. And she answers the phone, and I tell her it's Christopher, because that's what she called me. And she said, "Oh, my dear, sweet Christopher, and it's so good to hear your voice." And it had been years since I had talked to Mrs. Adams. And I'd said, Mrs. Adams, I have some bad news. And she said, no, you don't have to tell me. I already know. And I thought, she's elderly. What does she think she knows? But okay, Mrs. Adams, what is it you think you know? And she said, oh, my dear Darlene has gone on. Darlene, of course, was Mom's name.
Right.
She said, my dear Darlene has gone on. And I remember I got really choked up. Mom really literally had not been dead an hour at this point. And I couldn't believe that there's just no way she could know that. And I told her she was correct. And I asked her, how in the world do you know that? And she said, oh, she just appeared to me about 15 minutes ago and said, Julia, I'm finally free. So, I have replayed that in my head a million times because there just is no explanation for it.
Right.
There's no explanation for how and we should point out also, we were in Georgia. Mrs. Adams was in California. There's just no way she could have known. But her own explanation was that right after Mom's passing, Mom appeared to her and told her she was dead, or in her words, free. So anyway.
I remember you telling me the story years past, and I thought it was something like, Julia, I'm here. Or it just, I'll tell you, since now all these years have passed and all this information about astral travel and near-death experiences has come out, it's just so common. One of the first things many people do is they just go to tell people. You don't see them generally. But now we know that it's very common for somebody who passes on to instantly be wherever they imagine. They think of something and there they are. So now we know that's far more common than we used to, we were aware of pre-internet days.
And I guess maybe Mrs. Adams was sensitive to,
well, she'd had her own
something
ghost.
Enabled her. She what?
She dealt with her own ghost experiences. She had no.
Didn't she have some? Man, it's
ghost
issues upstairs, right?
I'll have to tell you about the stories.
All right.
Because my stories involve Mrs. Adams as well.
Okay. All right. So it wouldn't be unusual for her to see Mom.
Right.
If Mom traveled to see her. Okay. So that happened on September 7th of 1989.
How did that strike you?
Well, with our background,
you're 21 at that time. I'm 28. You're 21.
Yeah. Well, I already believed in the supernatural. It's things we can't see and don't comprehend, don't understand, certainly. So it wasn't shocking as it would be probably to a lot of other people who hadn't had the same background that we had as children and
right.
hadn't been raised, the way we were. So with the stories that Mom would tell us too, of the stuff that had happened to her and during her life, those stories alone, if Mom were alive to tell them, those stories alone are, scary as hell. So
yeah.
Anyway, so the next and biggest event happened in June of the following year, June of 1990. So Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. So Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and President Bush, 41, mobilized the military to go and throw Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. Everyone remembers that. Everyone's old enough to remembers that. And so I was sent to Saudi Arabia, but initially I was sent in June of 90. I was sent to RAF Mildenhall.
Yeah, I remember, because that's when you called me and said you were on Air Force 2.
That's right. That's right.
I'm yelling at the photo lab because I was in the Air Force at the time as well. And Chris calls me and says, Ralph, you're not going to believe where I'm calling you from. Air Force 2. And I said, what? And he's like, as I remember it, you're saying, yeah, I had to get over ASAP to England, and there was space on the vice president's plane, and they put me on. And I lower the phone, and I'm in the middle of the photo lab, the office area, and all these other sergeants are around me, and I go, my brother's on Air Force 2. And I hear you yelling at me through the phone, Ralph, shut up. Do you really think they're going to put an E3 on the vice president's plane?
Well, so yeah, that's when I went. Not on Air Force 2, but yep. And so once I was at RAF Mildenhall, they assigned me to they have a 3-story dorm-like building. We called it billeting, you'll remember, in the Air Force.
Yeah.
It's got rooms up and down 2 long hallways, and then in the middle of each hallway, it's got a bathroom. It's a central common bathroom and showers and all that. You know, the U.S. hadn't had a large-scale deployment like that. I mean, we're talking about like 500,000 troops that were activated ultimately for this. They hadn't had a large-scale deployment like that in a long time, not since Vietnam, and Vietnam was smaller. So there were some planning issues. In fact, just getting over there, as you recall, was a mess for me. But at any rate, they initially assigned me to a room on the first floor of 3-story building, but they really didn't do a good job planning, because half the folks on that floor were working the night shift and half were working the day shift. So as you were trying to go to sleep, other people were getting off and out in the halls partying, basically. And so it caused problems. You couldn't get any rest. And I made numerous complaints about it, and ultimately they decided they would move me up to the 3rd floor. Well, there's nobody on the 3rd floor. It was only being used for what we call transient aircrew. So an aircrew comes in, they need a place to sleep just for that night. They're getting back on their plane tomorrow morning and flying. Well, at the time, most the aircrews were flying directly into Saudi Arabia and not into the UK. So I had like the 3rd floor to myself, which was great because I didn't have to share a bathroom. I didn't have to share the showers. It was quiet. So I thought, this is awesome. I'd just been promoted to sergeant too. I remember I'd just become an NCO, and I thought, well, this is all good. This is good stuff. All right. So I'm now studying for promotion to staff sergeant, and you know, you had to test for that. Yeah, and there was, yeah. I had a NCO prep manual, and it's about 10 o'clock at night. And so obviously it's dark outside. I'm in my room. There's one round light overhead in the center of the room mounted to the ceiling. And my back is to the wall in a chair, and the light is in front of me up above. Anyway, I've got the book open. When all of a sudden a shadow starts on the lower right-hand corner of the book, and the shadow moves up until it covers all but the very left tip of the page. It's as though someone has walked up behind me, is looking down on me, and they are blocking the light. But of course, there's nobody there. There's nothing to cause the shadow that I watched move across my page. And it's still there. It's there. It's as though somebody is standing here looking down at me. Well, I jumped up, put the book down, and thought, all right, you know, just like the event with Cedar Street with the breath, what is going on? What just happened? And so I'm completely sober. Don't use drugs. Just here we go.
You're in the Air Force, yeah.
Yeah. So all right, but I decided I'm going to go to bed. And but I'm a little bit creeped out. So I know that. So my bed is on the opposite wall from the light switch. So I know that once I hit that light switch, I'm going to be immersed in blackness. I'm not going to be able to see anything, right? But given what just happened, I'm not real comfortable with that. So next to my bed is a huge window, and it's got this windowsill that's probably 24 inches deep. And it's a typical Air Force military, heavy polyester drapes, gray drapes.
Yeah.
Well, I pull the drapes all the way open and I tuck them into the windowsill. Now I did that because the street lights are out there below my room. They're, because I'm on the 3rd floor. And I know that when I turn off the light switch, I'll have the street lights will put light into the room and I won't be in pitch black. So turn off the light, climb into bed, and I've got a little bit of light coming from outside. I'm fine, and I go to sleep. At 4:30 the next morning, something pushes me. Something actually touches me and shakes me, like somebody's trying to wake me up. And I wake up. And I immediately am aware that there's something else in this room. It's not just me. Something just shook me, physically touched me, and I'm now wide awake. So what happens next is, right next to the light switch on the far wall, next to the door, there's a black mini fridge. And on top of the mini fridge are a bunch of red Dixie cups, not Dixie cups, but the Solo cups.
Okay.
That I've got on top of the fridge. They're upside down on the fridge, stacked up. All of a sudden, the stacks of Solo cups start playing like the shell game. They all start moving around on top of the mini fridge. They're just going all over the place on the mini fridge. And first I just hear them. Then I look over and I can see them doing this.
By the light from the window.
Exactly, from the street lights that are outside. Right. I can see what's happening on top of the mini fridge. Now, obviously there's nothing to move cups around. They're just moving around. And it's willful. It's not like they're falling over or something, or there was a breeze, or whatever.
Somebody's letting you know they're there.
Yeah, they're shuffling around.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that and growing increasingly terrified when all of a sudden, probably the single scariest thing in my life happens. The drapes, which I have all the way, they are opened below the foot of the bed. That's how big this window is. So it's 6 feet long. And they're tucked into the windowsill. There's no way these drapes are going anywhere. I'm going to keep that light. That was the point. All of a sudden, they just go, shh. They just rip shut. They just rip shut. And the window is right here. It's right next to my bed. So the drapes that were 6 feet away and tucked in are now literally, I can touch them. They've just been. And of course, that's scary because there's nothing that should move the drapes.
Right.
But it's scarier because I am now in pitch black. It's 4:30 in the morning. There's no sun. I am now in the condition that I was trying to avoid originally. It's completely black. I can't see anything, but I can hear the cups. They're still going. So I am obviously terrified. I roll out onto the floor, trying to get my legs to function, with the adrenaline now that's pumping. And I'm in my underwear, but at this point, modesty is the last thing on my mind. I threw the door open. I ran to it, threw the door open and ran down the hallway of this, building. And I sat against the wall, like 4 doors down from my room, sat there in my underwear in the hallway and for almost 3 hours until there was enough light. The sun had come up, there was enough light where I felt comfortable enough going into my room just to grab my shaving kit and my uniform. And then I went to the office and I told everybody. I told
exactly what happened.
I told them everybody what happened. One of my coworkers went with me back to the room, helped me pack all my stuff up. And I went and I stayed in his room until, because he had like 3 beds in there, and I went and stayed in his room until I was sent back to the United States.
What was their reaction?
It's funny, they believed it. And I also told the billeting office, so the office responsible for assigning rooms and responsible for that building. I also told them what happened. and they said that it wasn't a surprise that they hear about stuff like that happening all the time.
So they didn't laugh at you. You know, there was
Nobody
no
laughed.
ridicule. It was like,
No.
okay, this is well, all
Yep.
right.
Yeah, and when you think about it, if you believe in ghosts, I know some people don't, obviously, but when you think about it, I mean, the UK is an island. It's not even really a huge island. And you think about how many millions of people have been born, lived, and died there. Man, the opportunity for ghosts, I would think, is, I mean, it's, you know, inescapable
yeah.
that there are going to be ghosts there. So, I mean, who knows what used to be in that building, or how long that building's been there, or what's under the ground of that building. I don't know. But all I know is that whatever it was, it scared the hell out of me. It got me good. And
Yeah.
yeah. So, you know, I guess one of the benefits of those things happening, though, is that if you have any question about life after death, it solves it. You know, it doesn't solve the intricacies of Christianity versus, you know, whatever
happens
world. Exactly. But it does answer the question about whether there is life after death, or at least the possibility of life after death, because that's, I mean, these things weren't there, but they were there. So anyway.
That is terrifying. I would have, you know, I have a lot of stories to tell you, but nothing like that ever happened to me that I can think of. Or maybe when I tell you mine, you'll go, oh, no, that was actually terrifying too. But that's scary.
Yeah,
So
it
was there
was.
anything else later though, in, you know, later life?
You know, after there were a couple of smaller things. I mean, one, you know, it was just a bad dream I had where after mom died, and in my dream she's in bed with my then wife and I, and sits up, you know, in the middle of she's between us, and she suddenly sits up and she can't speak because her lips are sewn shut, and she's ripping at the threads so that she can speak. But that's just a dream. Whether mom was somehow communicating, I don't know. But the only other odd thing that happened, and I don't know what to make of it, but I'll tell you, and you can decide. But so on the anniversary of mom's death, so 1 year later, so September 7th of 90, several of us had actually had some sort of experience. Remember, Dad was the first. Dad woke up, as he tells the story. He was remarried, and he woke up to find mom's ghost standing next to the bed with her hand on his arm. And he knew it, he could see it was mom. And so obviously that's a creepy thing. If I wake up and mom is standing next to me, I'm probably gonna be joining her, because I'll probably be dead at that moment. But something interesting happened to my wife and I, because I was, you know, as you know, I was married at the time. We were living in base housing at Robins Air Force Base, and we had been living there for, my goodness, probably the better part of that year. And we'd never had any problems with water, hot water specifically. And I remember, because I got up and I went to work that morning, and I want to say it was a Saturday. I didn't normally go to work on Saturdays, but I had something I had to do at the office, and I went onto the base, and my wife called me and said, hey, I went to take a shower and there's no hot water. And I was like, well, you'll have to call you know, housing maintenance. They'll come out and see what the problem is. Yeah, I don't know, maybe the hot water heater's broken or something, I don't know. But anyway, I left the office and I went back to the house. Now, not that she doesn't know how to turn on the hot water, right? But hot water faucet. But of course, I immediately go in and to all the spigots and faucets and start turning on hot water, and there's no hot water.
Right.
And so I called base housing maintenance, and they came out and they opened the hot water heater closet. Now, frankly, I'd never even opened that closet. There was no, I don't need the hot water heater. I don't need access to it. But there it is. And he starts looking at it and he starts laughing. And he said, "Why did you turn off your hot water?" And we said, "What are you talking about? We have never even opened that closet." He's like, "Look." And he starts twisting the knob that allows the hot water to function, right? It's all the way off. It's been turned all the way off. He's now turning it on. And he said, "It's all the way off. Why would you do that?" And I said, "How long would we have had hot water with that all the way off?" He said, "Whatever was in the tank, and that would have been it. So you would have had hot water for an hour or two." I said, "We've been living here for 10 months. Could we have had hot water for 10 months? He's like, "No, it's impossible." So, given that it was the anniversary of her death, and given that Dad had seen her that morning, and I believe you had a story that occurred on this day. And the reason I remember that it was because by the end of the day, we were all in touch with each other. By the end of the day or the next couple days, we were all realizing that we had had events occur on that anniversary. And so, anyway, I would like to think that if that's Mom, that she could find a better way than turning off the hot water to signal that she's there. But anyway, it was kind of weird.
It was weird, yeah. Well, I mean, clearly something turned it off.
Something turned off the hot water. It got our attention. So, hey, no, and that was about it. Because as I've gotten older, and as Mom has been gone longer, I really, although my belief hasn't diminished, the events themselves have not repeated.
Right.
But I'm not doing anything to, solicit those types of. I'm not going out ghost hunting, for example. I'm not hanging out, camping outside Mom's grave, for example.
Like Alex and I did twice.
Right. Hoping to catch an orb.
Something.
I'm not doing any of that, and so.
That was really just an excuse for us to hang out, have a few beers, and relax. We stop recording a second. All right, so you just remembered something else in our chat.
So this was right after Mom died. This was 1989, and they lived in a house in Carrollton. The house that we, in the family, we just know as the house on Roy North Road. And one evening, so my wife and I were sitting they had it was a picnic table that they had in like a little, like a sitting room, just as you came in the house. And, but it was inside. It had a tablecloth on it.
I remember that. It's odd how you remember these little things.
Yeah. And so my wife and I were sitting there, and there were a couple of other people sitting there. I think there were 4 of us, maybe 5 of us. And we're talking about different things, and undoubtedly we're talking about Mom because she just died. And there's a stereo in the living room, and you can see it from the table. You can see the stereo and the big speaker. It's one of those old stack stereo component stereo, and it's got the green digital readout. These huge numbers for the radio station. I remember we had it on the radio, and we're talking, and the lights in the house started flickering, and that made us stop talking. It got our attention, right? And we're all kind of looking around, and of course, we're talking about Mom, so that we're a little on edge. Well, the next thing that happened put us a lot more on edge, because what happened next is the stereo tuner started turning on its own, and the numbers on the stereo just started doing what you do when you change the channel. All the numbers started going up the bandwidth, so the numbers are constantly changing as they're rising, going up. All of a sudden, as that's happening, and we're all watching it happen, we're sitting there literally watching it together happen, watching the numbers change. There was a bright light that formed above the stereo in the living room, and all of a sudden it shot across the living room, through the kitchen, and out the back. Well, as far as we could see,
right.
But now past the kitchen was actually Mom's bedroom. There's a hallway, but it passed through that wall. Whether it went into her bedroom, whether it went outside, whether it traveled to Mars, I don't know what happened to it. But yeah, so that occurred. And actually, my wife at the time was pretty terrified by that. And of course, one of our other brothers, Alex, has had a lot more episodes in that house because he lived there. I wasn't living there at the time. I was stationed in Warner Robins, Georgia, and we were just visiting because of Mom's passing. So
I was already
Alex
back
lived
in
there.
South Korea at that point. I immediately went straight back overseas. Yeah, Alex, I remember his story somewhat. What I most remember about the story that I hope Alex would tell us is how scared he was at one time. He was by himself, and he practically runs. As I remember him telling the story, it's almost like a cartoon. He got so scared, he ran into the door, just boom, trying to get outside.
Well, yeah, and I hope Alex will tell the story too. But I mean, he thought Dad was home, and Dad was not home. But he hears Dad clearly moving around downstairs, and Alex is even talking to him, calling out to him, and telling him to save him some coffee or whatever. And
that's right.
And then he gets down there only to find that Dad is gone, and Alex has been alone in the house, and all of this interaction is not with any person. Yeah, and Alex got terrified, and I hope he'll tell the story himself.
That's funny. Well, all right. I'm glad you remembered that.
Yeah, me too.
I hope you enjoyed that. Now, stay tuned for the next episode, which is going to be my brother Alex telling us his stories, and I'll upload those tomorrow.